When I was 12 years old, I was hiking deep in the mountains in Colorado Springs at a Christian retreat with my father. I ran miles ahead of my father and arrived at a spot on the river they call the Punch Bowls. Usually the water is calm and you can swim in it, but there had been thunderstorms recently and the circular body of water was spinning like a whirlpool. I walked around the turbulent current and slipped, falling into the whirlpool. It spun me around violently and the strength of the water was pulling me under. I tried to grab onto the stone walls, but they were too slippery. Eventually, I gripped a wall with the last knuckle on 3 fingers. I tried to pull myself out, but the water was sucking me under. I tried once and failed. I tried twice and failed. The third time, I closed my eyes and prayed to God to save me. I knew that I was going to die in that moment. The next time I opened my eyes, I was miraculously out of the water. To this day, I know that God answered my prayer. He saved my life. I wasn't praying to the Muslim God in that moment. I wasn't praying to Buddha. I was praying to the Christian God. The Christian God rescued me from death at 12 years old. Years went by, and as a young adult, I struggled finding my way in this world that is hostile to Christians. Sometimes I wondered where God's love was to be found. I felt alone for much of my journey. I felt spiritually isolated. At one point, I realized I needed to rediscover what God's love truly means and how I could better treat my neighbors with that love. My relationship with God grew, and I met my wife, Hada, at graduate school at the University of Kentucky. She had a very similar experience as a young adult, but she was also committed to doing God's will. After our first date, she told me she was a Christian, and at that moment, I knew God brought me to Kentucky to start a family with her according to His will. God brought Hada from South Korea to Kentucky, of all places. He brought us together. When we got married, we felt the fullness of our conviction to enter into a covenantal relationship. We read Timothy Keller's book, Meaning of Marriage, together during our engagement. That book is full of biblical wisdom. Keller talks about how society today sees marriage as a consumer relationship. When my spouse no longer satisfies my selfish needs, I'm no longer interested in their services. He juxtaposes the secular understanding of marriage to the Christian one, namely that a Christian marriage is a covenantal one, not a consumer relationship. The evening before I got married, I cried so hard and so loud, hugging my father with tears of joy. When the pastor had us read our vows before the congregation, I had never felt such conviction. That was the first covenantal relationship God established for our family as a unit. When Hada and I got married, we had to remind ourselves frequently of a quote from Keller's book. He says, "If 2 spouses each say, 'I'm going to treat my own self-centeredness as the main problem in the marriage,' you have the prospect of a truly great marriage." God used our time as a newly married couple to reveal how we might turn from our selfishness and see His will for our family. Then Hada got pregnant. She came to me with tears of joy, announcing Ella's arrival in her womb. This was the first fruit God gave us from our covenantal marriage. Now that our daughter Ella is 8 months old, we have had to seek God's will even harder. Our selfishness tries to creep in, but our daily prayer for our family is that God will give us the wisdom as parents to lead this family down the path of His will. This baptism today is a symbol before this church that is equally as covenantal as our marriage. This baptism brings her into the fold of God's children here on earth. This baptism shows her that the creator of this universe, the creator of life itself, loves her more than even her parents could possibly demonstrate. We love our daughter. We want her to seek God's will. And until she is eligible for confirmation, it is our duty to show her God's love, through His teachings, through the love of this congregation. Our church is called Embrace. Now I know why. We as Christ's disciples embrace Ella into covenantal union with her Creator. May God bless you, Ella. May God grant us as parents the wisdom to lead you into His loving arms. God knew you before you were born. He knows your personality before we do. He knows what your strengths and weaknesses will be. We promise to love you unconditionally, but most of all, we promise to show you how infinitely greater God's love is for you. Welcome, Ella, to the Holy Universal Church. We are so eager as your parents to see God work in your heart and build your character over the course of your life here on earth. Amen.